A very warm welcome to all of you. Today, we kickstart our monthly regulatory insight series, which are online debates looking at key topical issues in the global south. To discuss the topic we are debating today, I would like to give the floor to Shweta Ravi Kumar, who is the Executive Director of FSR Global.
Thank you so much, Meheli. A very, very warm welcome to our speakers here. Today, we have a very interesting topic, which is electricity market coupling in India. So just quickly introduce our four speakers. We have Mr. P.K. Pujari, who is the former chairman of CERC and also an advisor at FSR Global. So he'll open the floor presenting to us about the journey of India so far. Then we have Alberto Pototschnig, who's the deputy director at the Florence School, and he will be presenting the European experience, particularly looking at how market coupling and competition sort of flourished between different member states in Europe. Then we will be followed by Professor Nils-Henrik, who is from the University of Oslo, who will give us the Nordic experience, focusing on the NordPool experience per se. And then we'll have Professor Anoop, who will try to be the devil's advocate and look at India's options in terms of market coupling. Do we go for it or not? So that's the lineup we have. Today's topic is particularly interesting simply because we're looking at coupling of markets. In the strict sense, we're not looking at market coupling. India is one single market. So to say, we're looking at coupling of exchanges, where we have three different exchanges with the different distribution of the market share here in India. So then the question comes as to why market coupling and why now? Should we be doing it in the first place, or is there a reasonable case on why we need to be doing it, given that our wholesale transactions are in the range of 6 to 7%? Then comes the question, should we implement market coupling? Then what are the different roles of the power exchanges and the other actors? Would we have a market clearing operator, coupling operator, and who would perform the role of the market coupling operator? Would it be the power exchanges themselves in turn, or would it be a system operator, or would it be a completely new entity? We will learn from the experiences internationally. And also try to understand introducing something like this, if it were the power exchanges to be working in turns, then do they collaborate during the first half of the day and compete with the first half of the day and collaborate during the second half? How will that really work? Then comes the question of what sort of an algorithm would be used. Do we take one of the best ones from within the exchanges that they have, or would a new algorithm come into place? Then in this case, how collaborative would this process be if we were to implement? And of course, many other issues with terms of would there truly be competition if we were to couple? What are sort of the socio-economic gains that we see the system will see? And we truly be promoting competition amongst the PXs, given that the scope for innovation amongst them would slightly reduce, and also would there be an improvement in the transmission utilization should we couple within a single market the different power exchanges? So many more questions, and I'm sure the audience will have a host of questions on your own. Feel free to put them in the Q&A box. We will take them all up once the presenters have given their different points of views from their experiences. On that note, I'll give the floor to Mr. Pujari, who will kick off giving this journey of India up until here.
Thank you, Shweta. And I extend a very warm welcome to all the participants. This very hotly debated topic. What I'll try to do is basically give the background as to why we are debating the topic of market coupling today. If you recall, all of you, that the market coupling provisions were introduced in Power Market Regulations 2021. The earlier Power Market Regulations didn't have such provisions. And in the draft Power Market Regulations, in fact, had provided that there shall be market coupling, and the detailing were also provided in the draft regulations, and the role of the market coupler also had been detailed in the draft Power Market Regulations. But based on the comments that were received from the various stakeholders and based on the submissions that were made by experts during the public hearing, the Commission CERC then reached the conclusion that market coupling needs to be debated and examined further and in greater details. So having reached or having concluded that based on the stakeholders' comment and the submissions made during the public hearing, in the final regulations of the PMR 21, Power Market Regulation 21, the detailing part were removed and only enabling provisions were put. And if you look at Regulation 39, it says that the provisions with regard to the market coupling and market coupling operator in these regulations shall come into effect as and when decided by the Commission in accordance with the regulations to be specified separately. So the CRC has to now come out once if they decide that yes, there will be market coupling, have to come out with the detailed regulations. That means the whole process of debate, the stakeholders' comment, further examination in detail of various aspects has to be undertaken. When we did this process, two main issues were brought before the CRC. One was, is market coupling in the Indian context required? That was the first issue that was being discussed, that were discussed. And the second issue that were discussed was, if at all yes, what is the right time to introduce market coupling? So these are the two basic issues on which all the submissions and stakeholders' comment did come before the Commission. And in the meanwhile, in the various forum, you find that several experts have already given their views on these issues. There are strong arguments both in support and against market coupling. I mean, these are there if you in Indian context, a lot of publications, a lot of opinion has been is available in the public. So the questions that are being raised and needed to be answered, and I'm sure that, as Sweta said, and we have experts in our panel, they will try to address these questions. If market coupling, is market coupling a good idea when all the power exchanges are functioning within the same geographical area, which Sweta did touch upon? Did not effectively tantamount to as if only one power exchange functioning. So that is one of the issues on which a lot of opinions have been expressed, and then other opinions have been divided also. Is market coupling a good idea when one power exchange is dominant? As in today, we have 3 power exchanges. In fact, when the market coupling provisions were being drafted in the draft regulation, that time the Commission was processing the licensing of the 3rd exchange. We had 2 exchanges, and the 3rd exchange was, the license was being processed that time. So when during the drafting stage, the Commission was aware that there will be a 3rd exchange. So if you look at the market share, as was pointed out by Sweta, if one power exchange is dominant, now does it make sense to have the market coupling? I mean, these are the issues that has been raised, and the position has been basically taken based on what the answer to these questions are. These questions need to be debated and answered, but when we do this, the idea is we should look at the Power Market Regulations 21, Regulation 37, which provides objective of market coupling. I mean, the enabling provisions was put in the Power Market Regulations, and Regulation 37 provides the objective of market coupling, which the Commission thinks that if at all market coupling is to be introduced as and when and that regulations are brought in, then at least these are the objectives that they recognize. Now, what are those 3 objectives? This is important because you need to debate, you need to question or answer the issues whether those objectives are being met or what is expected is being fulfilled. The first objective that PMR, Power Market Regulations, identifies is discovery of the uniform market clearing price for the day-ahead market or real-time market or any other market as notified by the Commission. That's the first objective, market coupling. Optimal use of transmission infrastructure. And the third, maximization of the economic surplus after taking into account all bid types and thereby creating simultaneous buyer-seller surplus. So if these 3 objectives that the Power Market Regulations have identified, and based on achieving these objectives, the enabling provisions have been made, and we should, or the debate should normally focus around whether the position that is taken, whether these objectives are being met or are being achieved. So I leave it here. I hand over to Sweta, and then let's see what all the experts submit on these issues. Thank you, Sweta.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pujari. So now I invite our international experts. Alberto, probably you can give us, based on the information that you've gained about what India's thought process has been up until now, what has been the European experience so far?
Yeah, thank you, Shweta, and good afternoon to everyone. Very happy and grateful for the invitation. I will refer to the European experience, but also will try to extract from the European experience lessons which could be useful for the current process in India. The European experience has been mainly about coupling markets in different jurisdictions. This has been the project of electricity market integration. So I will focus on that when I refer to the European experience, but then I will try also to take that experience and see what it says in terms of coupling of power exchanges within the same jurisdiction. Coupling was the main purpose of coupling in Europe was to try to allocate and use the interconnection capacity efficiently, and this could be either within a jurisdiction or across jurisdictions. But let me first sort of try to see what models in Europe we consider. Actually, we considered at that time, and we to an extent used different models. There were three possible models. One was the extension of the market in one jurisdiction to encompass other jurisdictions. That, for example, was the way in which Slovenia started to couple with Italy, and still, you know, it was part of the Italian market when it was extended to neighboring country, Slovenia. The other one is superimposing an additional market to the one to the local one, or to different power exchanges. I mean, this we didn't use it in Europe. It was used, for example, in Central America, and it is one way of accommodating different markets within the same framework. But this I don't think is relevant for India. The third one, the third model, which is one that eventually was used in Europe, was to create a market with new rules, which would supersede the rules in the different jurisdictions. Now, clearly there are advantages and disadvantages, but I would like to go quite quickly through them because they're pretty obvious. I mean, if you want to extend the market in one jurisdiction, or if you want the rules of one power exchange to other power exchanges, that's probably the quickest way to do it. And you're also using tested tools, but then clearly requires acceptance of the other power exchanges, the other jurisdictions, of the rules of the incumbent or the larger power exchange or jurisdiction, even though some sort of change in the governance should be required in order to take into account the fact that now the rules apply to a wider audience. I would skip this one, and then Europe has chosen to go for a market in itself, which was different from the market in the different jurisdictions, encompassing all of them, and that would require new rules. And this is what Europe has been working over the last sort of 15 years in trying to develop new rules. These were embodied in a number of packages, and were then exemplified with what we call as the electricity target model. So it was a clear way forward on how the different power exchanges over the different time frames, how the different TSOs would have to work together in order to create a European internal market. Now, the issue has been raised as to whether market coupling is good or bad. If you have more than one power exchange and one is the incumbent and dominant, well, I think intrinsically, and let me sort of just go through the slide, which probably covered this, and then I'll come back to this one if needed. Intrinsically, there is the services provided by organized marketplaces, which are basically power exchanges, are competitive in nature. There is no good reason to limit competition in providing trading services by organized marketplaces. However, what you want to do is to pool the liquidity, because that's what increases the efficiency of trading. So here you have to find a way of allowing competition This is clearly always the best rule for a market, while pooling the liquidity. And here, I think we need to make sure about a number of things. First of all, we need to solve the trade-off between allowing innovation on the one hand and having products that can be coupled in the market coupling between the different organized marketplaces. So this is something, one has to be careful by defining harmonizing rules for the market coupling on different organized marketplaces, not to hamper too much innovation. Because obviously, if you want to market couple different organized marketplaces, then they should have compatible instruments. Otherwise, it's difficult to couple them. The other thing is to make sure that the coupling, the gate closure for the coupling of the different markets coincides with the gate closure for trading within an individual market, an individual power exchange, because that actually promotes competition and promotes participation in the smaller power exchanges, which may be a way of promoting competition. So this is something that in Europe, this comes from the experience in Europe where the market coupling until now, the gate closure of the market coupling algorithm was ahead of the gate closure of individual marketplaces. And then clearly market participants were attracted to the more liquid organized marketplaces, the more liquid power exchanges, and this could be considered as anti-competitive. That is what that is what the lessons learned in terms of organized marketplaces and the coupling of different organized marketplaces. What also we've learned from the process more widely of market integration, I think this is something which is relevant, as much relevant for integrating across jurisdiction as it is relevant for integrating within jurisdiction. First of all, political support. I think you need political support. This will not happen unless there is political backing and endorsement. The expected benefits. Here, the expected benefits of coupling within a jurisdiction, if there are no transmission constraint within the jurisdictions, are probably different from the ones that we have been looking at in Europe. In Europe, most of the benefits have been achieved by increasing the efficiency of the use of cross-border interconnection. And when I say cross-border, I mean borders between market zones. So not necessarily between different jurisdictions. I mean, I think you are probably familiar with the, sorry, this one is with the market geographical structure in Europe. Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Italy, they're all divided into different market zones, and therefore the efficiency of the use of the transmission interconnectors between different market zones within the same country is also an issue which is obvious of concern and which market coupling has actually improved. So this is the second, identifying the benefit, because sometimes, the cost and, some of these processes are delayed or opposed on the basis of implementation cost. Implementation costs are typically one-off, while the benefits are ongoing. So it has to be clear what are the benefits that market coupling is trying to reap. Stakeholder involvement. Clearly, you need the buy-in by stakeholders. In Europe, at some stage, it was market participants the most vocal in favor of the integration of the market. Governance implication. I think there is, in Europe, there was clearly the difference, the difference allocation of power between European and local authority and national authorities. I think if you want to go for market coupling, there is clearly a governance issue between the coupling level and the governance of the individual power exchanges. And this is something to be agreed upon. The technical complexity is almost never an obstacle. In Europe, we are getting to the limit of what the coupling algorithm could do, Euphemia, and that was developed more than 10 years ago. And I think with the enlargement of the market, it has reached somewhat its limit. But otherwise, typically, this is never a big issue. And then timing, I've heard that, in India, timing is not yet definite. I think you need a timeline. I think you need something which is ambitious if you want this to happen, because maybe, in the end, the political decision would be not for this to happen. But if you want the coupling of different power exchanges, which would be a first step towards coupling with neighboring jurisdiction, you need a timeline which is reasonable but ambitious. Because otherwise things would unlikely happen. This is the lesson learned. I'm not saying that these are recommendations for India, but these are the lessons that we learned from the experience in Europe. And if we were to go through this process again in Europe, then we'll take a good note of this experience and the lessons that it has provided. I think that's it. I can talk more about the cross-border market coupling, but I think it seems to be sort of beyond the focus of today. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alberto. May I now request Professor Nils-Henrik to give us the other side of the European experience, which is the monopolistic approach. Over to you. Mihaly, maybe you can share the slides.
Thank you very much, Sveta, and thank you for the invitation, and hello to everybody. Since now Alberto has sort of covered the European experience in more generally, I'm going to zoom in on the NordPool, or in particular the Nordic countries, and the NordPool experience, which is generally considered to be good. We're generally quite happy with NordPool, and even to some extent a bit proud of it. And I think there's some, which I'll try to explain to you, some reasons for this. One is that NordPool has a very long history. It has developed over a very long time. Secondly, the development has been sort of an evolution, a bottom-up process, which has not been run by governments or regulatory authorities, but has essentially been run by the market participants themselves. And finally, there's a very strong rationale from the underlying generation mix for why trade across geographic areas and countries makes very much sense, which that has been clear to everybody. So there's been sort of a joint benefit of developing a well-functioning market. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here's the history. And as you can see, it goes back a long way. The first phase is purely Norwegian, and Norway is a hydro-dominated electricity system. So it was clear from a very early stage that electricity companies would benefit from being able to trade with each other. Sometimes there was a surplus somewhere and a deficit another place. Then a little while later, the situation was the opposite. So it was the clear rationale for establishing a power exchange where these companies could trade. This was started out as a regional exchange, but was then gradually developed into a national exchange. And when deregulation happened, which was started out in Norway in 1991, essentially what was done was just to open the national exchange for trade to other parties as well, including consumers and retailers. Then interestingly, when Sweden and subsequently Finland and Denmark deregulated, there was discussions whether they should start up their own pools, their own exchanges, or whether they should integrate with the existing Norwegian one. First Sweden and then subsequently the other countries decided that it was more efficient to have a common exchange, and hence NordPool developed as a Nordic exchange during this period. NordPool operates under a Norwegian license and is subject to regulation from the Norwegian government, but that was still acceptable to the other parties, the other countries. Then after 2000, the exchange has been extended in two ways. Firstly, new countries, in particular in the Baltics, have come in and been part of the NordPool, and partly NordPool has extended its activity, so to speak, into other regions where there are other power pools or power exchanges. So in competition with existing exchanges, for example, in France, Germany, Belgium, Austria, Netherlands, and so on. Next slide, please. So this is a map of NordPool prices from yesterday. And as Alberto already pointed out, there are many zones, so the prices differ. Within Norway, there are 5 zones. In Sweden, there are 4, and so on and so forth. In some of the other countries, there are single zones, such as Finland and France and Germany. So there's a single price. These prices might be difficult to read, but I can tell you they vary a lot. In fact, in southern Norway yesterday, prices were negative, whereas in France and Germany, and in particular Poland, they were quite high. So NordPool now not only covers the Nordic region, but also offers market participants to trade in other regions where they could choose a different power exchange. Next slide, please. Here I've taken out an example of prices. This is for March the 1st. I could have taken yesterday, but that was a bit of a boring day because prices were essentially constant over the day and extremely low, around 0. So this is late winter in the Nordic area, and you see the green price is for the middle region of Sweden. The red one is for the eastern part of Denmark, and the 2 gray ones are from south of the southern part of Norway, the lower price, and the other one is from the northern part of Norway. And you can see that although it's a completely integrated market, where transmission capacities are being used to their full extent, there will at times be considerable price differences between the different regions depending on the demand and supply. You can see, for example, between northern and southern Norway, there's a great difference. You also see that this differs over the day. For example, Sweden starts out with the same prices in Oslo. Then during the middle of the day, when demand is high in Sweden, prices go up, and then in the afternoon, evening, falls back again to the level of Oslo. So it's a fully integrated market, but there are considerable price differences because of the zonal system, where there are different prices in different zones. Next, please. Here you see an illustration of the Nordic generation mix. And you will see that that differs a lot between the different countries. Starting out with my own country, Norway, you see that it's totally dominated by hydro. Whereas, for example, Sweden and Finland and also Denmark has a lot of thermal capacity. Also a lot of wind, which of course, where the output changes from day to day, from hour to hour. So there's a clear benefit of integrating these markets, because the hydro in particular can be used to balance the market in the short run, and then in the longer run, over the seasons and between different years, because the inflow differs a lot between seasons, little in winter, a lot in summer, and between years, there are dry years and wet years. There's a considerable rationale for having trade between these different countries, because the generation mix is so different. So trade actually goes back, Nordic trade goes back much longer than the modern day power exchanges, but then it was organized in a very different manner. But I think this explains why there was an interest in integrating markets, why it was thought a good idea to have a single power exchange, and why the power exchange there is a lot of trade. Most, in fact, of the power physically goes through the spot market, which is very liquid and functions quite well. Next slide, please. So to end with a few observations, as I said, this market is generally considered to be quite well functioning. There's a high liquidity. In fact, most of the physical trade goes through the spot markets, some of it through the intraday market as well, but the spot market is completely dominant. And although there have been anecdotes and there have been certain investigations to see if markets are being manipulated or working quite well, that doesn't seem to be a major problem, probably because of the very high liquidity and the strong integration of the various marketplaces. There are still challenges. Electricity markets in Europe in general and the Nordic region in particular have become quite complex. There's a multiplicity of linked markets, which are partly also overlapping, right from balancing markets in a very short term to capacity markets, which are there to encourage investment in capacity. So getting these various markets to work well together is something of a challenge. There are also horizontal issues because although the European markets have been integrated quite considerably, and in particular in the Nordic region, there is still heterogeneity across regions, across countries, in how some of the markets are set up and how they're working, what products are offered, and so on and so forth. There is an issue about the granularity of price zones. Most spot markets operate with an hourly time frame, but there is discussion of whether that should be reduced to increase the response of the market to changing, in particular, weather conditions with a lot of wind and solar energy. And there is also discussion about the intraday market, where you can trade up to close to gate closure, whether that should be also could happen more real time. There are examples of that in Finland, for example. You can trade right up to the gate closure. So, but these are, I guess, overall smaller issues. The general lesson from NordPool in particular, but from Europe more generally, as Alberto pointed out, is that this is now working quite well. Maybe I should end by saying that integrating so many markets under similar rules and regulations means that it becomes very difficult to change anything, because so many parties needs to be involved, and there needs to be established a consensus that the change makes sense. So we're probably in a situation now where it might be more difficult to develop the market than it used to be when we had a number of regional markets. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nils-Henrik. I'll now give the floor to Professor Anoop Singh. Now that you have listened to both sides of the European experience, what are the the key takeaways when we compare it to the Indian case? The floor is all yours.
Is sharing my screen. Just let me know if it is visible.
Not yet.
Okay, is it visible now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Well, so there are not so many slides there, so don't worry about it. Just a opening slide, just a couple of introductory slides, and that's it. I think it's very interesting to hear to the previous three speakers about what coupling is all about. So it's if you look at the Indian power markets, the way it has developed, Mr. Pujari did mention how we have evolved and what was the reason that the power market regulation 2021 actually introduced an enabling provisions, and why we are discussing it now. So let me just skip this part. So let me just take you from the CRC's paper where it talks about, yes, is there a potential benefit if you couple the markets? Well, of course, in theoretical sense, if you have two large markets, for example, if you have suppose Bombay Stock Exchange and National Stock Exchange, the BSE and NSE, and then you say, let us couple them, will it be resulting into some gains? The answer is yes, it will improve the liquidity even further, right? Of course it will. But of course they are, more comparable in the sense since both have been there in the Indian context, have been doing their business independently. Is this the best model in the Indian context? We'll come to that in a little while. The CRC's star paper also highlights, will it impact innovation? Maybe yes, to some extent it will. Should we have really a new market coupling operator versus one of them can be there on rotational basis or something like that? And what would be the suitable algorithm for that, right? So these are the few things, and what is the mechanism for clearing and settlement? And there are in fact many more issues. So I have just one slide to take forward the discussion is the why, what else. I'll come towards the end. How, when, and then, right? So of course, if you look at the Indian power market, we had coupled market areas, right? That's what we do. Whenever you have transmission constraint, there's a market splitting which takes place. Otherwise, by design, these are coupled market areas. But this is across geographical areas. And that's what the previous speakers also mentioned, that in European context also, largely all the examples of coupling have been in terms of geographical coupling across market areas, because now it gives you access to greater resources, divergent demand patterns and all that. And that's how it makes it efficient in some sense to couple those market areas. And that is what has driven the story in the European context. But here, in our context, I think the question has arisen probably because there is a dominant power exchange, and the other platforms had low liquidity as far as specifically they had the largest product in the market is concerned. So the next question arises that what is the real problem? I mean, if you ask a doctor, what is it? Is it low liquidity is a problem, or is it because somebody is abusing dominant position? If that is a problem, right? So in economics, we generally say, well, if there is somebody abusing dominant position, let's try and identify that abuse of dominant position and try and address that, right? If that is happening. So we need to really understand that. Is it just because you have a provision? I think it's a good thing to have a provision. I'll tell you, Electricity Act has a provision for parallel licensing, but it doesn't mean that we have parallel licensing all throughout the country. It's a credible threat that if things go wrong, this can be done. I think that is a very important essence that we need to understand. That's why Electricity Act also essentially provides for it, that you can have parallel licenses, but you need not have it everywhere now and then. Having said that, the key question I think comes is the key problem. So if I have to take one step back, is perhaps it's not the issue is whether it's low liquidity or it's probably also an issue that is a lack of transmission of information across power exchanges, right? So is there a way, and is it really impacting the market participants, right? Because it's illiquid or because sometimes even prices are higher or lower. So you can see the divergent prices. So I take back the example in case of, this was when we had these stock exchanges long time back. I remember I used to work in energy area, but I was still quite a lot related with the stock markets because I used to collect certain kind of information at that time. And we had these regional stock exchanges in the country, right? You had one in Kanpur, you have in Delhi, you had in Calcutta, Ahmedabad, and these exchanges. And if you notice, there used to be actually a clear arbitrage of prices across these stock exchanges. And people used to actually play that role of arbitrage, essentially to make sure that they can gain from these differences of prices across the Bombay Stock Exchange and the other stock exchanges, because the commodity was exactly the same. And you could always just through a phone call, talk to people and ensure that, okay, buy from there and sell from there and you can make money. But of course, that's not possible in the case of electricity as a commodity. But is it possible in some other way that you can have the transmission of information? At least you hedge this risk, which will to which certain market participant may be exposed to, because there are divergent price discoveries across exchanges. Well, this is what we'll address towards the last slide. Now, some of the issues were whether you need to have a market coupling operator or can you have on a rotational basis. But as soon as you say there is a new entity, you'll have to think about what its revenue model, right? So this is about hows that I'm discussing. In case we decide to go, there is a merit seen there. Then there are how, and then there are, of course, multiple other issues which will arise out of that. One has to also arrange for the inter-exchange clearing and settlement. There has to be a larger super exchange, sort of a super clearing settlement body, which has to do. There would be disputes. You will have to have a dispute resolution mechanism. And like the CRC paper clearly says, there will be potential impact on innovation. So even if now you look at the day-ahead market products or RTM products across the 3 exchanges, you will see that in one of the exchange, there will be 5-bit types or 6-bit type. In other case, it will be just 2 or 3-bit types. Now, this has happened because somebody thought there's a requirement of certain types of bits, so they kept on innovating and introducing. And this, by the way, happens in other products also. Then there is another question. I think this particular point probably ended up being here, should have been there. Are there actually gains to be made if you have to do actually coupling for less liquid products, which are across the power exchanges, right? So there are a number of products across power exchanges where the liquidity is actually comparatively much, much lower. I think if this has to be implemented, perhaps that is the one which should be done. Why? Because the larger products, you are still able to, get a platform to sell one way or the other. It is all those products where the number of players are relatively very, very limited. Many times the available products are limited. Their liquidity is of a serious concern. And there, I think the problem is across exchanges. And that's one test case, perhaps to try out any kind of uplink if you want to. Then if you essentially do that, then there are other operational aspects which may arise. So suppose say, okay, you have a new market coupling operator, then everybody is just a bit collecting agent. Well, then it's likely that you might have a pressure saying that, look, you don't need investment in technology. Should we lower this, even the net worth requirement, and let's have more players? So we have to be careful about that. If you have subside non-serious players and one of them goes bust, then somebody has to essentially, pay the bills for the participants who are exposed to that particular exchange. I'm sure there can be rules which can take care of that. Okay, what else? I'm just coming to that. So key question was there's a lack of transmission of information. So if suppose somebody is bidding in exchange A and the price comes to suppose 4.5 rupees, another exchange price comes to 5. So somebody goes to the other exchange, he said, hey, the price here came to 5 rupees, I should have bought, and it's a buyer, I could have bought at 4 rupees. Well, of course, a little bit of a premium has to pay. One can start engaging in the power markets derivatives, and to some extent, that information gets disseminated to some extent via the derivatives market. And to the extent, at least, there is a risk arising out of the divergent MCP can be taken care of. I think last but not the least, the very important thing is we still have to ask the question, why is it that one of the exchanges essentially became dominant and the others could not? Is it because they came late? Maybe it's case at least in one of the cases, it came late, yes. But in some cases, perhaps, the kind of clientele which somebody needs to build, that has to drive through, that trust has to build through, because that's a value creation which takes place whenever anybody engages in any kind of a business. And I'm sure this is questions which are available for the commissions and the policymakers to review and delve upon. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's all from my side.
Thank you so much, Professor. So we already have a bunch of questions here, but before I open the questions to the audience Q&A chat, maybe I can ask if the speakers or Professor Glesher or Ashutosh have questions for the panelists themselves, and then we take the questions from the Q&A.
May I speak?
Yes, floor is yours.
Okay.
Professor.
No, I have only one question because the 4 presentations have been extremely good, and I'm very grateful to my Indian friends and European friends because presentations have been extremely good. Only one thing is unclear. Do we have one driver into the seat? So do we have one Indian authority or player really driving the issue? Or do we have at least a coalition of players driving the issue? Or is it an issue totally open, totally democratic, and there is no real driver? That's the only question I have.
Maybe Mr. Pujari and Professor Anoop can respond.
I think Mr. Pujari is perhaps I will give him the floor for that. I can make comment, but I think I'll give the floor.
Basically, as I mentioned earlier, when this issue got debated, and then the Commission, on its own wisdom, that time thought that to explore the possibility of coupling based on certain inputs, and on debate, just thought that we need to really look at it more deeply, so we put the enabling provision. As in today, I understand the Commission had, after the Power Market Regulation 21 was notified, subsequently nothing much had been done, because as I mentioned earlier, it is a question of whether you want to do it, and if you really at all do it, then what point of time you need to do it. So I think subsequently the government under the Electricity Act, there is a provision under which the government in public interest may ask the Commission to do certain things. I mean, basically, and then Commission gets guided by that. It's not necessary that Commission is bound to act on those things, but on public interest, it can ask the Commission to look at those issues. I understand that government has issued that direction under 107 of the Electricity Act to go for market coupling. So after that, this issue has become hot, and then of course there are, as you say, that opinions are clearly divided, and so Commission has to take a very balanced view. They have to, when they take a decision, it is their decision, not because the government has told them to do it. They have to take a considered view and call. And now this matter get debated. So that's why it has become very hot, because they have to take a call whether to go ahead or not, and if they want to go ahead at today or maybe after some time. So this call needs to be taken by the Commission.
Very clear. Many thanks, Mr. Pujari. I understand better.
Alberto, you had your hand up.
Yes, no, I just wanted to make a point out of the European experience, and also link into what Nils-Henrik just mentioned beforehand. If we look at the history of power exchanges in Europe over the last 25 years, before coupling, we had a move towards concentration. There were, I think, initially 7 projects in Germany. 2 of them saw the light of day. Eventually, they merged. There were two projects in 2 power exchanges in Great Britain, and eventually they merged. And that was before, or market coupling reached the current level. And market coupling allows now, and actually, in fact, promotes power exchange to compete in the same jurisdictions. And Nils-Henrik has just mentioned NordPool going out, but EPEX the same, is providing services around, and I think that competition is good. And in every jurisdiction there is a dominant, and there is and there is a sort of an external or more than one external player. So I think it's if one believes in competition, even before you get to the point of abuse of dominant position, that probably coupling is good for that, because it allows different power exchanges to compete on providing services.
Thank you, Alberto. Ashutosh, you have your hand raised. Quick question.
Just want to thank you very much. It's been a very useful reminder, especially the European presentations, as to what was the contextual background, what was the motivation. What is clear from those presentations is that it was a very sui generis or a suo moto kind of action, where the exchanges, in their own wisdom, either for liquidity purposes or for product extension purposes, took that decision to merge, driven entirely by market forces. In this context, I just fail to understand what is the driving force or the logic behind the proposals as they are. Some of us who live away from India are not involved in the nitty-gritty, but perhaps gives us the opportunity to kind of just ask some simple questions, saying, which are these market areas that need to be merged? Are we kind of, doing this across South Asia, or, how is this going to happen? Because many, during the time of the Electricity Act in 2003, there were the 5 regional load dispatch centers, or 5 regional areas, and there were transmission constraints within those areas. Now, to convert those areas into pools would have been an idea. And if that had been kind of followed through, then perhaps there would have been a discovery of the transmission constraints, and that would have led to a very natural discussion, debate, consultation on market coupling. So I don't have a question, but I think it might just be useful to ask those questions, saying, what is it that is motivating this? Therefore, whatever answer now, or the proposals or the response that the commission gives, would be watched very closely. What I would perhaps be looking for is, if not now, why, when, and why, and what would be the conditions precedent that would need to be achieved for such a market coupling to go ahead. I think there needs to be really that debate. I'm not even going enter into contentious topics around governance or conflict of interest in terms of exchange ownerships, etc. here, because that is really not the point. I'm beginning to question the wisdom of such a move. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Maybe the Europeans can respond on what are the minimum ingredients that need to be there before we cook this dish up. So, Alberto or Nils-Henrik, one of you can take the question.
No, Niels, do you want to go first?
Well, since I don't know India very well, it's difficult to provide an answer that is well suited to that situation. But I think that certainly in NordPool, and I think that's true for Europe more generally, it was clear to everybody that there was a gain from integration. And then, of course, there were discussions and difficulties involved in how to do that exactly. But I think there was the underlying rationale was, it was not driven by political motives. It was seen by everybody as a good idea. And then what then remained, and we had, I should say, the European institutions to do it, to find the solution. So, and I guess that's also an important prerequisite.
Yeah, maybe I should just compliment on what Nils-Henrik has just said. Let me share again, if I may, my presentation here. In Europe, as we mentioned, was about improving the efficiency with which cross-border interconnection were used, and you see here that this level of efficiency has increased over the 10-year period from 2010 to recent years by from around 60% to around 90%. This is the making sure that interconnection are used in the right direction when there is a difference in prices. And what is interesting, and that's going back to a comment that was made beforehand, is that most of these achievements were reached before the rules came into place. So at the time when the market coupling was still voluntary early implementation of the market design. And then the other statistics, if we go back to 10 years ago, here on borders, on some of the borders, this is the percentage of times when electricity was going in the wrong directions, from where it was more expensive to produce and to where it has the lowest value. And as you can see, on some borders, it was more than 1 in every 3 hours going in the wrong direction. This is opening the window and throwing money out. And this is basically the benefits, the benefits that market coupling has achieved. In terms of welfare losses, we went from around 350 million per year in 2012-13, the same years to which I just referred, to half of that a few years later when coupling was extended to many other jurisdictions. So I think that was it. What was it? The idea of allowing competition between power exchanges within the same jurisdiction was a byproduct, but was not the initial focus of market coupling. It came as a byproduct, and as I said, if you believe in competition, it's a good thing.
Thank you, Alberto. Thanks, Nils-Henrik. So quick questions from the audience. So we have one from Jogendra Bera. So he's asking about, has the market coupling had any effect on innovation in Europe? In what way were there efficiency gains? And how was it balanced with incentives for innovation for the power exchanges?
I don't know.
Alberto, you can take. Oh, yes.
No, I mean, well, for one thing, for sure, it has helped with the penetration of renewables, the integration and the efficient integration, because renewables, the large penetration of renewables in an individual jurisdiction without efficient coupling with neighboring ones would have been much more problematic. And this is partly a physical aspect. The variability of renewable production can be better managed over a larger system, but it's also a way, or it's also a matter of sort of managing this integration in an efficient way, and market coupling does it automatically. And maybe just one thing, this market has provided the level of solidarity over the recent crisis that no politicians would have been able to agree in a short period of time. We had France having problem with the nuclear fleet. France has traditionally been exporting and at some stage started importing. Belgium had a problem with the nuclear fleet. The same. Politicians would have never been able to, they would have, disagreed forever, and the market did it automatically. So this is, it's, if this you call it innovation, I don't know, but it's really, a byproduct. And I don't think people have realized this, at least in Europe, how good the market has been, even at the time of crisis.
Thank you. I think a linked question with regards to the PXs again is, after market coupling in Europe, has it removed entry barriers for setting up new PXs within the same jurisdiction or geography? Have we seen entry of new PXs post-market coupling in Europe?
Nils, I think this is yours.
I don't think we've seen any new exchanges after market coupling, but what we have seen is that the existing power exchanges are extending their business to new regions. And going back to the previous question, this is being driven by innovation in the sense that the power exchanges need to offer products that are considered suitable, popular among market participants. So that is a driving force. If you want to convince customers to move from one power exchange to the next, it's not so much a matter of liquidity. It may be in some cases, but it's mostly a matter of, do you offer the sort of products that market participants need? I mean, do they have the right duration? Do they allow you to share risk? Are there derivatives that you can use to protect your positions in spot markets and so on and so forth? So I think that's been the main consequences, as Alberto also pointed out, that this market coupling has facilitated competition between the existing market exchanges, not so much by opening the market for new ones.
Thank you so much, Nils-Henrik. There was another comment about, shouldn't we first focus on deepening our markets and also probably introducing some of the missing market products before even we start considering market coupling? Reactions from any of the panelists? Yes.
Well, of course, if I have to say yes, we have a still long way to go to gain, make gains in terms of optimization of the power procurement and delivery across the country. And that's how it has been tried through a variety of other mechanisms like SE and all. And now there is a new proposal for SCUC also. So there's a good amount of optimization within the sector, which is being reaped through these instruments. So the kitty, which officially looks like about, say, 7% in terms of short-term optimization, actually is larger than that. It has already grown because of the SCD, right? And this is something we often lose sight of. It has already grown. Only thing is the exchange-traded product has not grown, and that perhaps may grow over time. It depends on what is the appetite for the, especially the consumers who have access and to make the choices. And that can perhaps drive the next level of volumes, because right now the discoms have been able to optimize and they have been improving in that sense. They are optimizing their procurement. I'm sure there is a room for even further growth there.
Professor Anoop, maybe some questions from also Mr. Suni in the audience. He's saying the coupling of market coupling proposed in India, it's not about just coupling of clearing volumes, but rather coupling of also the aggregated supply, aggregated demand curves of all the power exchanges. Any quick reactions?
I see. So of course, if you are essentially talking about in a pure theoretical sense coupling, you are collecting all the bits from everybody in that. So it is essentially you are, instead of 3 separate aggregate supply and aggregate demand curves, now you will have a single aggregate supply and aggregate demand curve. And in a pure classroom environment, if you ask me, yes, of course, it gives, again, there is, that is something easy to demonstrate. Whether there will be social welfare is going to be substantial or not, that is something one has to estimate. Because remember, whenever we talk about social welfare, the welfare is about for the sector as a whole. So when we say, for example, if you move from a certain kind of market framework to another market framework, in general, I'm saying when we compare, say, monopoly or competitive environment, we always say that, somebody gains, somebody loses, right? So there are certain market participants who will gain. So many a times you see producers lose. So if you have more competition, producers do lose, producer surplus, right? Of course, they do lose. Now here in this case, it's not about producers losing or gaining. It's about amongst those producers or market platforms losing. So there is a distributional impact, which is going to be also important. So it's not just about the gain, which is happening in one part. It's also about the distributional impact of who is gaining and who's perhaps losing more. That has to be evaluated. In fact, that's what has, in a sense, as a student of development economics, is what you always evaluate. You have a policy, you just try and test it. You say, okay, is there a gain from it? Yes, okay. Is there any loss to it? Okay. Is the loss justified? Is the gain good enough? And that's how we take a decision.
Thank you, Professor. And I think one last point is this, which is recurring, which is about improved transmission allocation. So in the case of India, we see that the concentration of the market share is at 1px, almost to the odds of 99% in certain market segments. So if you were to couple, is there really going to be an optimization of transmission allocation going forward, given that they're already used to dealing in these volumes?
Essentially, this question is relevant to some extent, but I'm saying, given the fact that we don't have congestion as such, which is occurring nowadays, congestion is really almost thing of the past. We don't see congestion happening. So whether is there an inefficient transmission allocation, there could always be room for improvement there. But as of now, is it really proving to be a constraint that because it is allocated and hence it's not available to somebody else? I don't think that has happened. So given that we don't see congestion anymore, in fact, nowadays there's hardly any instance of congestion.
Mr. Pujari, maybe you can take the floor for a couple of seconds.
No, I just want to respond to what Anoop mentioned. See, if you look at the focus for market coupling has been basically on 2 counts. One is that basic universal surplus or economic surplus or social welfare, maximization, and also the transmission constraint. As was pointed out, the second issue is not so important. The first one, efficiency, cost, and gain, has been basically hard as for the market coupling. Now, for that, a lot of exercise has to be done. Now, you have to be doing the simulations based on the past actual with data and see whether really go for coupling, had the coupling taken place virtually. say last 6-8 months, then what would have been the gain? Number one. Number two, also you have to do this, basically sensitivity analysis, bit changes or the type of bit changes or the seasonal or the peak demand, the peak time or the low peak time. What happens to those things? I mean, at least based on the simulation, if it's undertaken, I'm sure CRC will do it along with the power exchanges, but if they're available in the public domain, then one can look at it and then take a call. I mean, that could be a guiding factor. I'm not saying that you can come out very clearly, but at least let's understand what happens on some number, on basis on some number. I mean, that was the idea. I'm sure this exercise must have been done. At least I don't have any access to look at it, or anybody has any access to it.
Maybe just one last question before we close. It's about the role of the independent system operators in this country. So if they were to participate as a market operator, would there be a conflict of interest because they will have to procure ancillary services from the market? So maybe reactions from any of the speakers again, from the European or the Indian experience.
So certainly in the Nordic countries, and I think in Europe more generally, there is a clear separation here that ensures that the power exchanges are not in any way influenced by the actions of the system operators. So that can certainly be done. Of course, there needs to be a will and the possibility to do it, but there's no need that the operations of the system operator should interfere with the market as such.
I personally feel that this conflict of interest will not rise because basically, if the system operator becomes the coupler, I mean, the way it is envisaged in India, basically you take the bid and run the optimization model. So as in today also, as was pointed out by Anoop Singh, in case of market splitting or congestion, the system operator do run it. I mean, for the best clearing market price. So I don't think that in that sense there will be a conflict of interest. And anyway, they are banned. The act doesn't allow the system operator to get into trading part. So obviously there will not be the trading interest, but purely technical work they can do. So in that sense, I don't think there is any conflict of interest. As far as procurement of ancillary services or everything is concerned, that already I think the grid code does provide maybe on the competitive basis or of a market, they can procure at some point of time. So that enabling provision has also been made. I don't think there is any conflict of interest as such that will arise.
One point, Shweta, on that, I think Mr. Pujari did rightly mention, the act, of course, doesn't really expect a system operator to be a market operator in our context. You don't, but of course, one of the key points that may arise if that has to happen is that will the system operator be ready to take kind of risk because of the clearing and settlement that he'll have to manage? And that is a very big task, essentially, which is currently being done by power exchanges, whether the system operator is ready to do that. And that's a different ballgame. Of course, they are currently doing it in some sense for ancillary services. But then once you're dealing for a much larger volumes and not a much more continuous basis.
So is it safe for me to ask that are we ready yet as the country to make this decision, or do we have to do some more simulations runs before we take a much more closer look at whether or not to roll out a regulation much more in detail with regards to market coupling in India? Any yeses and nos? Pause, whatever syllables you would like to use, speakers. Professor Anoop, Mr. Pujari.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me, I say, look, there's, like I mentioned, any policy step that you take or regulatory step you take, you always evaluate what is the reason that you want to take this. So what's the key objective that you want to meet? Second is, what is the potential impact, the gains as well as losses? Is there any distributional impact across the engaged stakeholders? And then, of course, third and most importantly, will it lead to new issues and how do we handle those issues? And that's why I wrote and then. So whenever you do something, there are always cases that new issues will arise. So one has to address that. And then we have to again go back and review, did we really address the original question or not, right? That's what we need to continuously ask ourselves. And that's how we tend to think that the regulatory environment keeps on evolving and improving.
Mr. Pujari, any last thoughts?
I look at from a macro perspective. I think the regulator or the policymakers have a lot of issues to address. And I think at the moment, right now, where we stand as far as the power sector in India is concerned, I think this is not a very important or critical issue right now. So I think we should basically focus on a lot of other issues to be addressed. And we can debate, discuss, and come to a conclusion and look at it. And probably at the right time, I don't know what is the right time. Probably you can experiment. But right now, my personal opinion is that I think we, at the moment, leave it. I think we've got a number of other issues to be addressed. And I think we should concentrate our focus and attention time on those issues. And we can debate this, continue debating this, and then see at what point of time we jump.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Pujari. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the speakers. We shot a little bit over time, but thank you to all the audience for posing so many interesting questions. I think it's only opened up more homework for all of us who are researchers to do and come back to the floor. And also like to thank the international and national experts for contributing to our very first Regulatory Insights debate format focused here on India. So wish you all a lovely evening and see you soon next month.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.